All right, welcome back to ABA Exam Review and the continuation of our BCBA Task List series. Today we're continuing with Behavior Change Procedures and G5, Modeling and Imitation. Modeling and imitation outside of our principles and maybe differential reinforcement are probably two of the most commonly used interventions in ABA, especially working with young learners. As learners get older and they're able to imitate more, then the modeling just kind of occurs naturally. But at some point, you may have to teach learners to imitate. And so understanding the nuances of what a model is and then how to teach imitation is very important. However, we're not going to overcomplicate this topic because what modeling and imitation are not complicated ideas. So as always, we're going to keep it as simple as possible. Be sure to check out behavioranalyststudy.com for all of our study materials. Please subscribe if you have not for all of our updates and videos. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. Let's go. All right. Modeling and imitation are foundational when teaching humans. When you're working with humans, you are going to be constantly modeling whether you realize it or not. It's often how we teach, and we learn through imitation. Just if you get a chance, observe a group of people or young learners or whoever, and watch as that group engages in activities. People are looking around, looking at others, watching for what they do. It's a core foundational way we learn and how we teach. Now, modeling is a specific behavior change strategy. That's important. It's a strategy, right? It's not just this idea. It is a specific strategy where learners imitate skills performed by live or symbolic models. Notice, imitation is a key part of modeling. Without the imitation part, you aren't really modeling. You might be engaged in the act of what you would consider acting as a model, but unless someone is imitating you, then who are you modeling for? Now, there are two types of modeling. There are planned, which are prearranged, which is typically what we'll use in the practice of behavior analysis. And then there are unplanned models. So when you go to a social situation, I always like to use sporting events. If you've never been to a certain type of sporting event, when you're there, as plays happen, as things happen, you're going to look around and see how others react, and then you'll follow their lead. That's an unplanned model. Typically, in practice, you're going to plan your modeling, but for generalization purposes, we want to utilize unplanned models as much as possible. And so, since imitation is key and core to modeling, we have to understand what imitation is. And so, imitation leads to the rapid acquisition of behavior and is defined by four criteria. There's a reason we stress imitation so much. It is such an effective way for learners to learn. It can lead to the rapid acquisition of previously unknown skills. So, four main ideas behind imitation. One, the behavior is evoked by a model. If the behavior is not being evoked by a model, it's not imitation. Okay, so that's very important to remember. We're going to go straight to three. The behavior happens right after or close to the model, meaning the latency is low. Modeling is not seeing something today and then tomorrow going and doing it. That time, too much time has passed. I mean, imitation is not that. Too much time has passed between the model and the actual imitation. Imitation is evoked by a model and it happens nearly immediately or as close to immediately as possible. It's also important that there's formal similarity with the model, meaning if you're imitating, you're imitating. You're not watching the model and doing your own version. You're watching the model and you're doing what the model is doing. There's formal similarity. And then the behavior is primarily controlled by the model. Okay. So if we think about research, think about confounds, these variables that affect what we're trying to do, and we don't want them to. The model needs to have control over the imitation in order for it to be true imitation. And these rules are important when you're teaching imitation because as you're teaching imitation, you're going to want to keep these four ideas in mind to make sure your training is effective. So with that said, let's talk about imitation training. Systematic way, again, it is an idea, but we do it systematically to teach imitation to a learner who does not possess a repertoire of imitation. The idea behind imitation training, and it's kind of messy, you want the learner to copy the model regardless of what the model does. So, with that in mind, let's be ethical, let's be smart. Whatever you're going to teach in imitation training, choose wisely, because imitation training, you want them to copy the model no matter what, spoken, acted out, whatever it may be. Generalized imitation indicates effective imitation training. So you know imitation training is working if you see your learner start to model unprompted, untrained, or unreinforced models, right? If we reinforce hand raising over and over again in the presence of the model, yes, we understand eventually they might learn how to raise their hand when someone else raises their hand. We know imitation training is effective, though, if someone else sneezes and blows their nose, and then the person, learner, sneezes and blows their nose, being untrained, unprompted, and unreinforced. So keep that idea in mind. You can see the importance of generalization with imitation. Very, very crucial. So here are some basic steps to imitation training. They're ideas, right? They're general ideas. One, teach prereq skills. You got to assess and teach prereq skills. So sometimes you call them early learner skills, pre-learning skills, attending skills. This is the ability to look at somebody, watch somebody do something, sit long enough where somebody can do something. And you might hear people say, well, we don't want to just train robots where we're just teaching them to sit in the seat all day. Or yes and no, right? That's a skill you have to have in order to imitate. You've got to be able to watch something and watch it long enough to be able to imitate it. So prereq skills are very important. Pre-learner skills are very important. Then select the models for training. You want to choose a lot of behaviors. So typically gross and fine motor skills are great to use. If the learner is verbal, that's great to use as well. You want a lot of different types of behaviors, but behaviors that can be modeled and imitated fairly quickly. Because what you're going to do is you're going to do a pretest. You're going to figure out what can the learner imitate, what can't they imitate. You're going to make a list, and then you're going to sequence those models from easiest to most difficult based on the pretest. Remember, the idea behind imitation training is they are imitating anything you do. So if you start with the easiest things that they already know how to do or are close to doing, they're getting reinforced much quicker, and you're trying to build that repertoire systematically. So then you're going to train. You want sessions active, you want them brief, you want them fun, right? Moving, okay? Use reinforcement, and then most importantly, fade out your prompts. When we talk about the model being the controlling factor in imitation, that's what we're talking about. The prompts, the do this, show me. When you hear that, when you hear someone say, well, we're working on imitation, and then that person says, raise your hand, the learner raises their hand and they say, see, they imitated. That is not imitation. That is a prompt for modeling. We want to fade those prompts out. And then guidelines for modeling. What makes a model? How do we model? What's important in modeling, I should say. Models that are similar to the learner can increase the likelihood of imitation. Think about a high schooler, okay? A lot of times the last thing a high schooler wants to do is imitate an adult, okay? At that point, high schoolers know it all. They're going to do what their friends do, okay? Tale as old as time. Same goes for maybe young kids. Same goes for adults, right? What adult wants to imitate a kid? Well, not always, but that's the general idea. Models that are similar to the learner can increase the likelihood of imitation. Similarly, if you can find a model with social status or prestige, right? Those are more effective typically than just a random model. You want to put an emphasis on the critical aspects of the desired behavior. So if it's a very discrete behavior, this might not be a big deal, but if it's a more big, large, grandiose behavior, emphasize what you really want to see imitated. And then combine your modeling with instructions, rehearsal, feedback, reinforcement, naturally occurring setting. Over and over again, I say, all these strategies, they're all rooted in the same ideas. What are we doing? We're setting goals, right? We're rehearsing. We're giving feedback. We're reinforcing. We're trying to generalize. Over and over again, it's the same ideas behind all of our strategies, okay? Once you can internalize that we're doing many of the same things over and over again, just serving different purposes and different styles of teaching, this starts to become very easy. Everything starts to become very connected. So, with that said, let's not overcomplicate modeling and imitation. Incredibly important. I'd put it up there with differential reinforcement and our consequences as most important things in learning in an ABA. But that does not mean you need to make it complicated, because it's not. As always, check out behavioranalyststudy.com. Subscribe for all of our videos. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.